The time is just gone 8:57. I know we are running a bit late this morning, but we continue with the broadcast this morning right here on Salam Media and talking about Gaza, talking about Palestine. Now, we've heard so much about solutions for Palestine, and some have actually even gone back and revisited some of the initiatives like Camp David and some of the other initiatives, and the whole question surrounding resolutions for Palestine, the UN resolutions, and even within the Muslim world, within the Arab world, and this whole idea of a two-state solution, Palestine, Israel living side by side, the status of Masjid al-Aqsa, the status of Jerusalem, all of that being discussed. But at the end of the day, when one looks at it historically, looking at Palestine and looking at going back even thousands of years, even going back to the Khilafah and the fall of the Khilafah, what was the status of Palestine? And this is what we want to talk about this morning to Mazhar Khan, talking about, and he's made it very, very clear. Mazhar, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for having me again.
Yes, Mazhar, we need to confront the hard facts in terms of what is happening in Palestine and also in terms of the solution for Palestine. And I've seen this wonderful piece that you've presented and talking about and telling people don't be shy about the solution, about talking and talking about the only solution for Palestine.
No, absolutely. I mean, what you mentioned just now about Camp David and some of these other accords which have taken place, all of them have never been about having a Palestinian state or a two-state solution. Actually, the motive behind all of these initiatives has been the normalization of Zionism in the Middle East. So that has been the motive for all of these initiatives. And this two-state solution, if you actually look at it right from the onset, it wasn't really I don't think a solution. It was an aspiration on their part because there was never ever a detailed plan. And right at the onset, even in the video I did, I showed a clip of Harry Truman, a president of the US at the time. He said that the Zionists, they want the whole of the land. He goes, we can't give them whole of the land straight away, but we can do it over time. And this is basically what has happened essentially. Right at the beginning, when they proposed the partition plan in 1948, I think about 52% was going to go to the Zionist colonizers and 48% would remain with the Palestinians. But over time, they've taken that. 67 war took place, and all the time up till this time, virtually none of the land is remaining. So the most of the West Bank is littered with settlements, and Gaza has been obliterated. So in reality, there can never be really a two-state solution.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, just while you are on the subject of there can never be a two-state solution, it's actually amazing how much people have actually bought into this whole two-state solution. And even looking at the Muslim world, we've heard it over and over again, even at the Arab summits that have taken place recently, while the carnage had continued, and they still continue talking about this as a solution.
Now, this is interesting because the only people that really talk about it now are the politicians. If you ask them what it means, they won't be able to define it for you. But the masses globally, Muslims and non-Muslims, I think a lot of the people now have realized this can never happen. And the Zionists have now clearly said, here with the British ambassador, when she was interviewed on Sky News, she openly said that we don't want a two-state solution. So they kept pushing her. So do you want a two-state solution? And she said, how can we have a two-state solutions with people like Hamas? How can we have with this reality? So they don't want it, and they've never wanted a two-state solution. And even when they were in negotiations, they're basically saying that they can't have political independence or economy. The airspace has to be under our control. The borders have to be under our control. We will decide, what goes in and out of the state. So, as I said in the video, it's actually just a glorified city council. It's going to be even have less rights than the Bantustans that you had. So, the Bantustans they proposed in South Africa during apartheid era, not proposed, but they had Ciskei, Transkei, and all of these Bantustans that they had. They actually have more rights than what the Zionists would ever accept the Palestinians to have. And we know that nobody accepted the Bantustans other than the South African government, and I don't know who else, if anybody else accepted them. So if the world accepted that we cannot accept the right of apartheid to exist in South Africa with the excuse of having a Bantustan, because the real objective behind the Bantustan was to allow apartheid to remain in South Africa. And the global opinion was, we're not going to accept this. So, more so, as Muslims, we should never ever even contemplate the idea of a two-state solution, because really what it's about is the normalization of Zionism. And Zionism is a cancer because it is discriminatory, it is supremacist, and if you allow it to exist, it will be cancerous to that land. So as Muslims, we know that Zionism cannot work. Even now, some people are talking about a one-state solution. But if you have another democratic state in the Middle East, say Palestine would be now one state with Zionists and Muslims and Christians, everybody living there. How is that going to be any different to Jordan and Lebanon? And Jordan and Lebanon haven't succeeded on any particular metric. So what we should know as Muslims is the only time we have had peace and stability in that area for 1400 years is when that land was under the rule of the Sharia, under the Khilafah. Because as Muslims, we give a rock solid guarantee to Jews and Christians. And even today, Jews are not safe under the Zionist control. The Jews will be more safe under the Sharia. The Christians and their churches will be more protected and safer under the Sharia. Same with the Jews. Even Umar al-Faruq radiallahu an, when he went to Jerusalem and he was given the keys of the city, he invited the Jews back to that land because they had all been expelled. So Islam doesn't have anything to prove anyone, because history has very well documented the protection and the dignity Islam gave to non-Muslims under its rule. So I don't know why many Muslims are shy from openly saying that, what, the only tried and tested practical solution for Palestine is Islam, where people are, whether they are Muslims or non-Muslims, the Sharia gives them rock solid guarantee of their protection as Ahl Dhimma. So not just for Muslims, but even Jews and Christians should actually say that, we want Islam in Palestine because that's only our guarantee. And you will actually find some Christians and actually many Jews who are anti-Zionist who will say that we want to live in the Sharia. I remember maybe 20 years ago, I gave a talk here in Manchester in the UK, and we had a rabbi on the panel, and somebody in the audience asked him, what do you actually want? We can understand you are anti-Zionist. You don't agree with Zionism in Palestine, but what is it that you actually want? And he said, I would prefer for the whole of Palestine to return under the Sharia, and we would be happy to live under that. So we find some voices in amongst the Jews saying that Sharia is the best solution for Palestine. So I think we as Muslims need to be much more vociferous in saying that this is the only tried and tested solution. Anything else will be an excuse for Zionism to remain. And we as Muslims, and even as non-Muslims, should not accept that as a acceptable solution.
Yes, but also looking at it as Muslims, central to Palestine and the liberation of Palestine is a liberation of Masjid al-Aqsa. And again, when we hear all this rhetoric that is being repeated over and over again, two-state solution and the status of Jerusalem as a capital, there are many that have even bought into the whole idea that Jerusalem should be a shared capital. And we know that that is a no-no at this point in time. And again, as Muslims looking at the struggle for Palestine is ultimately the struggle for Masjid al-Aqsa and the liberation of Masjid al-Aqsa.
I'm speaking at a conference in London this Saturday, and I'm going to speak about this particular point because, Masjid al-Aqsa has been prophesied by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as being the last capital of the Khilafah, and he said when the Khilafah comes to Al-Quds, no one will be able to shift it, and if it is ever shifted from there, it will never return again. So we know that we are moving in time where we're seeing so many milestones talking about the end of time. We know we are approaching a time when Islam is going to return, Masjid al-Aqsa is going to be liberated. So for us as Muslims, when they talk about a shared capital, this is again an excuse for accepting that Zionism needs to exist. But with what's happened in Gaza now, we have seen a massive shift in world public opinion against Zionism. And we have an ideal opportunity as Muslims now. An opportunity has occurred where we can say, no, we are going to push only for Islam to be the liberating force. And I actually see a parallel in this, Brother Inayat. You know, Gaza, I see a parallel in that when Palestine was occupied by the British, they came to Gaza first. So the Arab tribes assisted the British colonial forces to occupy Gaza, and from Gaza they marched to Jerusalem, and that heralded the end of the Khilafah. This was 1917. So they went to Gaza, they went to Al-Quds, and that was uh, the 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 harbinger of the fall of the Khilafah. So I believe there's a parallel taking place now. Gaza is on fire. It's dragged the whole world's attention to Gaza. And I'm hoping and praying that amongst the Muslim armies in the world, they march there to liberate Gaza. Because once Gaza is liberated, they can then march to Al Quds, liberate Masjid al Aqsa. And I believe, or it should be, and it can be, the harbinger for the re-establishment of the promised Khilafah Rashida, which the Prophet ﷺ spoke about. So we as Muslims should always be optimistic, right? Because we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in overall control of all affairs. And we know that the fate has already been written, the ink is already dry. We know this land is going to be liberated. This should give us the motivation to push quicker and harder to play a part in the liberation of this blessed land, to bring peace and security for the whole of humanity. We are not talking about peace and security for Palestinians, and we're not talking about peace and security just for Muslims. We're talking about this deen that Rahmatul lil Alameen brought is the only guarantee of security for the whole of humanity. And we as Muslims really need to step up to the plate and, really be open and for this call for the resumption of Islam to bring peace and stability to the world.
And just finally, Brother Mazhar, this has been unprecedented. The last 77 days, we haven't seen so much focus on a single cause. We've seen so many marches, we've seen so many protests, we've seen so many events taking place, conferences, all of that. And this is unprecedented. We've never seen a single cause gaining so much attention, gaining so much momentum, like we have seen in the case of Gaza. And many of us are sometimes confronted with the situation in terms of how do we respond, particularly when it comes to a solution. We get involved in discussions in media, in forums, in discussing with our very own governments in terms of it. And, when you have your own government, like, for example, there was a meeting with the United Ulama Council of South Africa and the president at length spoke again about the two-state solution, which is in their mind. But sometimes we don't know how to respond to them. What do we tell them? What do we tell our own governments?
We sometimes parrot something which we feel is a safe thing to say, not realizing the political thinking behind it. So we think that, two-state solution, let's just stop the killing. But, the West, right from the onset, it has always been a case of normalization. So right at the beginning, when Palestine was occupied, the whole debate was framed as Muslims against the Zionist colonizers. Right from the beginning, they changed the frame of debate. It wasn't Muslims against the Jews. It was Muslims against Western colonialism and they setting up a colony. Then they reframed it from being between the Jews and the Muslims to Jews and the Arabs, and now they've reframed it from the Jews to the Palestinians. So they keep reframing it, making it more and more focused on that particular issue. But no, the Zionists never had the ability to establish the colony. This colony was set up by the Western colonialists in the same way they set up colonies in Australia, in America, the way they set up the colony in Southern Africa. They were kicked out. They've set up this colony in the Middle East. It's a Western project. The Zionists don't have political might. They may have monetary wealth, but politically they've never had that clout, even amongst the Jews. Many of the world's Jewish people are against this, even though the media won't show you that. So there are millions of Jews that live in London, in Stamford Hill. There's millions of Jews that live in New York who are actually anti-Zionist. But they will give you the impression that the Zionism is synonymous with Judaism. It is not. Zionism is a secular European colonial project in order to create a colony. So we should never, ever, if we understand that, we should never, ever call for a two-state solution. We should be confident to say only Islam has a proven track record of creating harmony. And democracies have failed in the West. If you look at Europe now, there is a rise of xenophobia. Muslims, like second, third, fourth generation Muslims who were born in the West, even we are considered as foreigners. So it has shown you that even these so-called liberal values have failed in the West to make different people feel part of that land, or feel part of that community, or feel safe and secure, where Muslims are now migrating to all sorts of places from Britain. People are going to Turkey and people are going elsewhere. So if Western secular liberalism has failed in the West to create harmonious societies, and Zionism has failed, why are we calling for anything other than Islam, which is the only system of governance which has created societies which has protected them and looked after them? Why are there churches in Gaza? Gaza has been under Muslims for 1400 years, but there are churches there. But the Zionists have obliterated the churches and is shooting the Christians in Gaza. They were safe under Islam. But Jew, Muslim, and Christian is not safe under Zionism. Jew, Muslim, and Christian, and even people of other faiths are only secure and guaranteed under Islam. And this is something we need to promote and get out there, so people know that Islam is not a nationalistic cause for a particular people. Islam is for the whole of humanity. Islam is rahmatul lil alameen, a mercy to the whole of mankind. And that they should see as a liberating force. Because, right at the beginning, when Islam came to Medina and jihad spread across the world, the primary purpose of jihad in the early days, which the Sahaba embarked upon, was to liberate the non-Muslims from oppression, not the Muslims. So when they went to Persia, when they went to Egypt, it was to liberate the non-Muslims from oppression. And this is what we need to return back to, looking to liberating the world's people who are oppressed under their liberal secular values, to liberating under Islam, so their life, property, and their minds can be secured by the Sharia.
Well, Jazakallah khairan so much for that, Brother Mazar. I know you and I can engage a lot more on the topic, but unfortunately, time is of the essence. But we thank you. We say Jazakallah for you taking time out this morning and being part and parcel of this discussion right here on Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Mazar Khan joining us out of London this morning. And with that, we're going to go for a break. We come back. We will be talking about the United States and Europe dealing politically with declining poll numbers as a result of their support for Israel. We'll be joined by the CEO and founder of the Cordoba Foundation, Dr. Anas Al Tikriti.